And welcome back to another episode of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. And live from San Francisco, the great city, we have Daniel Yeluashvili coming in to tell us about life in lockdown. But before we cross over to the great man, we want to thank Thrivous. Remember, Thrivous, you goes from $5 all the way up to $160. So that's $160 potentially worth of free Thrivous. The rules are in the description if you want to play along and get yourself some free Thrivous. We also want to thank I Am Transhuman for sponsoring this episode of Debt Nation. And we do have a few more sponsors coming on board shortly. So we're looking very, very much to that, who will help support the program, support you, support me, and we can become better and stronger as a community through this. And we'll come out on the other side of this bigger and better than ever before. And that's what I want to see. I want to see this turn into a business and generate incomes for everyone involved. And we can actually make positive impact and positive change in the world. And I think that's really what people want in this world. And Daniel, you know very well, it's climate change is a big issue. It's a bit frozen under the permafrost there. People aren't really talking about that. They will switch to virology. But, climate change is a huge issue, and it will come back as we emerge on the other side of this. But let's talk about life in lockdown. So you're there in San Fran. Give us a highlight what happened since January, since the virus it's up until where you are now, the sort of escalating process and what you are experiencing now. We're crossing over to you for a story time here on Debt Nation.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me once again. I have been experiencing a great number of things. See, San Francisco has a very unique style of government in that it sporadically becomes a lot more authoritarian than it usually is in times of extreme crisis. A while back, for example, we actually had the death of our former mayor, Ed Lee, and we had a temporary fill-in mayor that nobody actually elected, but he had a lot of radical new ideas about how to clean our streets and how to take care of our infrastructure. So what's happening now is no exception. What we're seeing as of March 16th, as of 3 days ago, as of this recording, at midnight, there was what is essentially a lockdown, keeping people inside for all reasons except for purely essential tasks, such as buying food, needing to walk a dog, or just needing to walk around for your own sake to get exercise. So we've had almost 72 hours of this now, and people are allowed to walk their dogs. In San Francisco, this is very significant because statistically there are more dogs here than there are children. So that's definitely something that people are actively doing. Personally, I've left the house to walk my dog. He was feeling a little under the weather, and I took him outside, and you would be surprised how many people are walking around here anyway. For a supposed shelter-in-place order, people don't really seem to be sheltering. Especially in the Golden Gate Park area, people are clogging up the streets, sitting around seemingly for no reason. Now, I'm not in a position to ask why they're doing this, but this actually is in direct contrast to what the municipal government has recommended that people do. And I can tell you secondhand, I wasn't personally there, but I'm acquainted very well with a person who witnessed this. There was a group of children on a playground here in the city that were actually told by a police officer that they need to leave and go home immediately because of the shelter-in-place order. So this level of authoritarianism is not something San Franciscans are used to, where usually our police regulations are pretty lax. This is very well known as a city of free expression and free speech and so on. There's a common expression here, you do you. Basically, if you say that to somebody, it means you're giving them your personal permission to do whatever they want to do and live their life as they please. If somebody does something weird, you say, oh, you do you, as in, I'm not judging the way you're living your life. So for a group of people like this to experience essentially a lockdown is very jarring, and I'm no exception to that rule.
Yeah, there was so much to talk about in that process. I just want to get back to a little bit of the history before we do rock into the current circumstances. The build up, was there a lot of fear and panic, or was it quite? What was the experience like up until the moments of this? I mean, it's been going on for a while. First, it was in China. It was there. Then it was in Iran. Then the virus spread to Italy. It's been coming, but now it's there. How was the build-up? What was the drama on the street? What were the people saying in the coffee shops, and what were the whispers, and what was the news and culture like, and the music? And give us a roundhouse kick on what it's been like. You're in a historic moment, one of these historic moments that will echo through time.
Yeah, definitely. Surprisingly enough, things were actually pretty calm. I was out and about during the presidential debate in South Carolina. I was at a bar. This was when some of the earliest known cases of the coronavirus happened anywhere. This was still in China. People were acting completely normally. There was no change. People were going wherever they wanted to go. They were going to work. They were going to bars and so on. The hustle and bustle of the city was still working as it usually does. And this continued throughout the time when we started seeing our first cases. I remember specifically seeing in the news that there were two confirmed cases of the coronavirus in San Francisco. One of them was not actually in San Francisco proper. It was from Redwood City, which is about 30 to 40 minutes by car south of the city itself, who was moved up here. So at first, there was no reason to particularly take it seriously. Now, personally, I've seen a very strong reaction from the city's Asian community, which is very historic. We have Chinatown in San Francisco. It's very well known. A lot of people go there. It's a popular tourist destination. It's practically empty. It's all shut down. There used to be people going in and out all the time, restaurants frequented very regularly. It's practically empty. And the neighborhood in which I live has a sizable Asian American population, and a lot of people are concerned because the association that people draw in the streets with the coronavirus is people from China. So if anyone looks even remotely Chinese, the sentiment in the air is that people need to be either suspicious or defensive, and this translates into the way people act on a day-to-day basis. I'll give you an example. I took a Lyft recently before the shelter-in-place order hit, and my driver was a person, in fact, from China with a mask, and his English wasn't that great, and he tried to communicate to me that he was there to pick me up, and I said, and there was a language barrier, but I managed to ask him why he was wearing the mask, because I thought he might actually have the virus himself. Because the mask doesn't help you if you're healthy. It only helps if you're sick. And a lot of people are either getting this wrong or they just don't care. If you don't have the coronavirus, wearing a mask won't make a difference. If you're already infected, wearing the mask is important so that you don't spread it to other people. So I get in the car and I see this guy in a mask. And I say to him, "Do you have the virus?" And he says, "No, because the virus is from China. We Chinese," those are his words, "are very careful." So that's how people are feeling now. This is kind of the crescendo from things proceeding as normal to people getting suspicious, especially along racial and ethnic lines.
Wow, that's big news, and yeah, it is big news. It's hard. It will be harder for these large cities to maintain control in an orderly fashion. I'm thinking. You mentioned that a lot of the restaurants have gone out of business, and it's happening here in Australia too. It's happened almost globally. A lot of restaurants and bars are shutting down worldwide. Do you think this will have a permanent impact on a small business landscape? Do you think that's going to lead to a lot of business closures, a lot of a rise in unemployment in the in that area of things? Do you think that will put stresses and strains on the city in going into the future, or do you think that it's something that's recoverable depending on how long this goes on for? If it's a short time, or a long time, what do you think?
Well, the best case scenario, I think, is even if we recover from this virus fully, both on an interpersonal level, whether or not people are infected and whether or not their lives are in danger, and on an economic level with regards to the impending recession, because, anyone with a cursory amount of curiosity towards the Dow Jones or S&P 500 or the rest of the global stock exchange, we'll see that the numbers are looking very dangerous right now. The global stock exchange is crashing. A lot of economists are saying that potentially we might be seeing another recession similar to the one in 2008. The best case scenario, in my view, is that a lot of small businesses will adapt. And the way I see this happening is we're going to see a lot less dining in restaurants and a lot more takeout, catering, and delivery. This is what a lot of businesses in my area are doing now. They're still open, but their hours are heavily reduced, not only to reduce patronage, but to reduce the amount of staff that are needed. And they're offering takeout and catering rather than allowing people to enter the restaurant. Because restaurants, no matter how much you clean them, they can be unsanitary. And who knows who can walk into a room full of 10 or 15 people and, cough or sneeze on, a surface from which people eat, and bam, there you go. Another 5 more coronavirus cases. So I think after this is done, we're going to see a lot more to go, a lot more delivery. So that's a changing business model right there.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that we're pushed into this position where we have to worry about, where we have to crash the economy on the fact that we don't have enough hospital beds. Now, obviously, this wouldn't happen under the USTP. This wouldn't be an issue under any sort of sensible government where they actually invested in public healthcare and private and public healthcare mix that was actually, ready for pandemics and ready to service huge populations of people, rather than investing in military and other frivolous advances, entertainment, sport, etc. No one needs a stadium when you're not allowed to go into the stadium. You know what I mean? What's the point of all those big stadiums sitting there now if no one's allowed to go and visit them? It's useless, but everyone needs beds. The demand for beds are high. So, it's unfortunate that, we have to do that. And you mentioned the stock market. Yes, it's all crashing globally. We are heading into a global recession, if not depression, and this is going to be a horrible time for humanity. It's going to be maybe, there was something going on in September with the bond, the yield curve inverting, which is what my market analysis was saying, that there was an impending crash coming. I didn't know that the virus was going to accelerate that to an astronomically terrible level. But, there is a bright side on this, that the reduced output on the world will relieve the environment a little bit. But these fiscal stimulus measures, now the fiscal stimulus that's coming is the fiscal stimulus that has been asked for and begged for by central banks now for the last 10 years or more. Since 2008, the central banks have said, we've done enough in the repo market, we've done enough bailing, buying back bonds and stocks, treasuries, bills, T-bills. We've done enough, and we don't want to print any more money because we're printing at about 16% of devaluation of the currency already, and the US dollar has already been devalued 99% of its purchasing power, and we need fiscal stimulus. This neo-Keynesian modern monetary theory idea, we need fiscal stimulus and we need helicopter money, and this virus provides a perfect opportunity to implement both those policies. Now, if the US dollar survives and it wins the ugliness parade and the debts are rolled up, you could see a huge economic boom. And I would tell you, if the USTP had its people in the positions as part of the bailout and the fiscal stimulus that's coming, projects such as yours, Mr. Yeluashvili, huge carbon capture schemes would be right up there with the brand new projects that should be fast-tracked. They should be fast-tracked. There are a bunch of projects that should be fast-tracked to help to save the environment. And I think the environment now could be fast-tracked in the new stimulus measures, and not only the new stimulus measures, the post-COVID-19 economy and the post-COVID-19 psychology, the global psychology of this unified global system is now fractured. It's not completely dead. People are people all over the world. But where we locate our buildings and how we locate things and where we manufacture things and all of that stuff, where we do business and how we do it and distribution of goods and services has all been changed. No one's thinking about India. If you're in America, no one's thinking about setting up a factory in India right now.
Yeah.
Whereas a month ago,
Or China.
they might have
Absolutely.
been, I was using India because India is even further away, right? China's the obvious one because China's, it's just an ocean away. They call it the Pacific pond,
Pacific
right?
Rim.
And it's not the Pacific
Yes.
pond. We start to realize the real distances of these things. And I was using India as a hyperbole, sort of this idea that we can go anywhere and do anything we want and it won't impact us because supply chains mean nothing. And I think in the coming boom, the economic boom, if pushed in the right direction, if people have their hearts and minds and souls open to it, things like your carbon capture scheme and related schemes should be part of this new economic order that fits in with environmental outcomes. What do you say to that?
Well, I think, number one, you're absolutely right. And I was just remarking to a friend the other day that the presence of this virus is an accelerationist's dream, because a lot of the more radical political ideas that are sitting on the back burner of most legislative bodies around the world are suddenly coming to the forefront, where we have a lot of American politicians, not just Democrats anymore, but a couple of Republicans as well, openly talking about either an equivalent to the tax rebates that George W. Bush issued during Hurricane Katrina, or an all-out universal basic income. Just last year, this was considered radical, and now all of a sudden, people are eager to, provide stimulus to the economy for lack of any better options, because a lot of people are worried that their small businesses are going to tank throughout the quarantine that is mandated on a national level. I mean, we're seeing small businesses close, we're seeing schools close, we're seeing tutoring services close. I mean, not everyone has a blueprint for a sustainable business that they've prepared in advance to counter a pandemic like this.
Yeah, and I was trying to envision that, and that is part of the project of Debt Nation, and I would love this community to rally on board and help me grow this out. Keep subscribing, keep sharing these videos, keep hitting up those things. We need 1,000 subscribers. We've been growing like mad as people have been waking up across the world. Now we're up to 465. The growth is enormous, and I know that still sounds small, but we're trying something very difficult here to sell some solutions, and solutions are very, very difficult sells. But now into times of crisis, now our voice is becoming louder and louder and louder when we're saying the economy is wrecked, the environment is wrecked, and we have solutions. We have solutions. So so it's very encouraging on this side of things. But for the global economy and other related matters, yes, it's a debt boom built on a string, and now people will really learn. People have to fast track their learning in order to survive and possibly thrive in the aftermath of all this. And it's a whole new rigging of human psychology. That's exactly what this is. This is I'm calling it right now the era of great reflection, and hopefully it stays as positive as that. Do you see any glimpses? I mean, I've been watching whitehouse.gov pretty much continuously on double speed, trying to figure out where they want. They are talking about drug companies such as Gilead and some others as having vaccines on the way. Obviously, still a lot of safety precautions. China, with its lack of human rights, and I'm not advocating that this is a good thing or anything like that, but with its its relaxed approach to regulatory matters in this way, looks to be fast tracking a vaccine. What do you think in the drugs and vaccine war? What do you think, Mr. Yeluashvili?
Well, China is actually recovering remarkably quickly, partially because of its de-regime, because of the amount of influence that the government has over the people in the country at the obvious expense of human rights and individual liberties. And like you said, I'm not advocating for that either. Certainly not. There are many problems with the way China runs its government. But the fact that it was able to not only close its borders, but also police travel within the country itself by using the social credit system to keep track of where people go in the country and what kinds of people are going where, they were able to prevent sick people from going near other sick people to a much more efficient and greater extent than the United States. And that's China's row to hoe. That's China's bull to pull. They have their own strategy. It's certainly different from what the United States is doing. It's significant, I think, as well, that the state of Israel is the first country to begin development of a vaccine. At present, it's going fairly slowly, but they're proceeding at a very steady pace. Home testing kits are developed and ready to be shipped out. In the United States, similar testing procedures are occurring. And I've also been following this a little bit. Russia is trying to actually cover up the amount of cases that they have, which tells me personally, if I were a betting man, I would say that they have a lot more cases than they would like to let on.
Russia is an interesting one because Russia can't at any cost admit its issues, and it won't admit. And it won't be years later until we find out the real stats, because you can just look at Russian demography for yourself. Like I've been saying on this show, Russia is a very old population. They have a very old demographic, and those people are about to go over into retirement anyway. And they have a whole cadre of engineers from the old Soviet era that are around between the median age of about 58, 59, in that area somewhere, and they're all the engineers. They're all the experts that are holding the glue of Russia together, whether that be roads or bridges or nuclear missiles or laboratories or nuclear reactors that they might have left or anything like that. Everything you can think of in terms of infrastructure. This is the age group of those people, and because of the oligarch system, because they haven't invested into their schooling system very much, even they've tried, it's just been not enough oomph in the Russian economy, and every time they attempted to more, they would get sanctioned by the United States through the Gazprom would get sanctioned, or Rosneft would get sanctioned, or the generic oil exports would get sanctioned, which is why Russia glued itself like glue to China, because it's got a big exposed backyard there in Siberia. That felt insecure. Russia's demography problem is just horrendous, and if this virus gets through and rips through Russia, Russia's toast. It's finished. That's it. I mean, it was already finished anyway. They have this year left with their military before their military expires, and if you look on the military front, The United States now is moving massive amounts of NATO troops and massive battalions now into Belarus and the Ukraine and other places, in effect trying to close off any attempt by Russia to take back these lands. Russia has one attempt to take Ukraine and the Caucasus. So US is just sealing the deal. It's everything I've been saying on the show. It's no surprise. Nothing's new. There's nothing new here. It's all just happening in an accelerated time. It's like watching the debate stage with Donald Trump versus all these other guys on the Republican stage. It's just boom, 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 boom. And instead of it happening in a little bit of a short time, it's all happening at literally the same time. So these are exciting times. And I think, out of all the analysis that I can see, the United States is coming on top of all of this, regardless of whether it gets shut down or not. The United States is winning. Iran is suffering massively under this weight. China's one game, which was trade, has stopped. So China's out. Iran's out. Russia is just about to be out, and their testing kits and facilities will be out. And Saudi, not sure where they're going, but oil is tanking, and in their bid to destroy the dollar with Russia, they're hurting themselves. So Saudi is out. They're almost all gone, and the next one is the euro. That's the other one they want dead. The euro being it was really awful of the Europeans. I never liked the euro. I didn't like the euro. I didn't like what they did. But the Marshall Plan built Europe back up and protected France and the UK and Germany, for all these places from the Soviet Union. They asked them to, and then what did they say? What did they do to thank the United States? They built the euro. They just carved out this whole chunk of the world, and they said, no, that's ours now. Thank you very much. So the death of the euro is the next one, and Christine Lagarde is out there trying to defend the euro. It's Christine Lagarde versus Trump, and it doesn't seem like they're going to win. I think America might win on that front as well. We'll have to see. It's one big global game. It's all happening at the same time, along with the end of Bretton Woods, which is the other thing that I've been talking about. That's or the Plaza Accord is the other one. It's the end of the Plaza Accord or Bretton Woods, whichever one you want to talk about. I don't really care anymore. It's one or the other. But this is it, and it's all happening at once. So it's good fun. It's horrible, actually.
It's horrible, but it's very interesting to see.
Yeah. It's the big time in history. It's the big play. But but it's interesting that you mentioned Israel here. Sheldon Adelson. I've been talking about Sheldon Adelson for a bit now. The last couple of shows. Sheldon Adelson, obviously being the big Israeli tech giant owner. Encouraging news coming out of Israel. I've been following this as well. In accord with a vaccine. Israel obviously having some of the most sophisticated doctors and scientists anywhere in the world. Do you just want to expand on this Israel idea with these technology parks producing these drugs and vaccines? Or what are you hearing out of Israel?
Yes. Well, it's actually a very interesting situation. Israel has announced some of the harshest, most draconian measures to combat the coronavirus out of any country. They have forbidden all tourists from entering the country. All tourists there are being shipped out. All citizens are quarantined in their homes. And all the religious schools, and that's not the majority. The majority is secular education. And most of the secular schools are closed now. Actually, it's the reverse. All the secular schools and most of the religious schools are closed now. The religious schools are pushing back, but the government is cracking down on them. They're closing up. There aren't really any options left. And here's the radical thing. Here's the most radical. And this actually kind of scares me. The government has authorized surveillance of people's phones in order to keep track of where they're going. Now, the obvious negative aspect of this, as any libertarian will tell you, is that the right to privacy is being infringed upon. But a positive aspect of phone use and technology use with regards to the coronavirus is that there's an app now. There's a privately developed app that's been created in Israel in order to give you a notification if you're walking around there and you pass somebody who's infected. And the way they do this is they keep track of your location, and it's private, it's double encrypted, it's privately stored, and it actually checks your location against the location of infected people. So if you pass by someone, you get a notification on your phone that tells you that you've done so. So a lot of good in technology, a lot of scary stuff in the public sector and public policy. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, yeah. Israel is one of the most sophisticated cyber powers on the planet. I would say easily top five. A top five is always a dicey one when it comes to technology. I think the United States would probably be number one, maybe China or Japan number two. It's really hard. Israel is definitely top five. Could be number three. It's hard to quantify. It's hard to qualify where they are in those powers. But absolutely, Israel is definitely one of the top five. And also the other thing about Israel is that they have a huge link of through the APAC and other agreements, a huge link up to the U.S. Military and civilian cyber contracts, like cyber treaties and stuff like that, technology treaties. So they get to get an artificial boost, so to speak. Not artificial; they earned it through cooperation and stuff. But they get a boost through the United States engine of creativity as well, obviously. But yes, no, Israel, very interesting, in their technological advancements, but it's good when it comes to things like this vaccine. We have the same sort of thing here in Australia. We have now cancelled all flights in and out. We can't escape my prison island. It's going back to the colony days when it was a prison. So, that's interesting. A return to the past. Good thing I don't mind it here. It's not too bad of a prison here. But yes, I do worry, though, I do think about the, students, the international students all over the world who have been frozen in time, wherever they might be. I mean, I wonder what they're going to do, what national governments... For example, I don't know about where you are, and you might have a different demographic, but here we have a lot of Chinese and a lot of Indians, obviously, because we're in the middle of both of them. But especially a lot of Indians, and the reason I'm thinking about Indian people right now is because the SAARC nations, obviously being a collection of nations, are unifying against this in one of the most popular against COVID-19 in one of the most populous regions on the planet. I mean, India itself, somewhere between 1 billion and 1.3 billion people, it was on trajectory to be the most populous nation over China because of the one-child policy, obviously. China is suffering demographically, but it was on track to being the most populous. But, if you look back through history, these pandemics always hit China and India in the worst sorts of ways, and I think that the national government in New Delhi, will be a little bit preoccupied with domestic affairs than to think of its students overseas. You especially have a large Indian population in New York. Now, I'm not sure whether they are students or they're self-funded, or if they're U.S. residents or what. But I know that there is a lot of Indian population in New York, and if they are in, let's say they're in just these service jobs, which are all going out, what will those people do? What will they do? Stuff like this, questions like this are popping up all over the place. It's the interconnectedness of the world. In so spurious parts of the world because of you're chasing currency risk. And human concepts, that people are now stuck and frozen in time. And, we can't teleport, but I kind of wish we could teleport to 2030 right now and reflect on all this and dig the data up. Unfortunately, we have to live through it all. But wouldn't it be interesting, don't you think? Isn't this a little... What do you think about this? This is fascinating, right?
Well, speaking of demography, there is... a decently sized Indian population in the San Francisco Bay Area, but a large amount of the people are Latin American. And a good amount of that Latin American population, not everyone, obviously, there's a lot of Latin American Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander folks who come here and are either undocumented or they are born to undocumented immigrants or they know somebody who's undocumented. And that's very significant because if you look at all the places that have been hit the hardest by the coronavirus pandemic, if you look at Italy, if you look at China, if you look at, and this is an interesting one, Bahrain. Why was Bahrain in the Middle East hit so hard and other parts of that region weren't? What do they have in common? Undocumented labor.
Ah,
The United States also relies very heavily
Qatar.
on
How about
undocumented
Qatar?
labor. Yes, and the United Arab Emirates as well. So that I think is statistically significant. As for international students, I know people who were studying abroad before the coronavirus pandemic began. They were in all sorts of different parts of the world. Some of them were in Spain. One person I know was in France. One person was in South Africa. They're all being sent back. And, that doesn't surprise me. And going back again to that idea of stigmatizing people on the basis of appearances, I think that's going to be a feature of an increasingly globalized society, where in the absence of clear and concretely defined borders, people are going to revert, or not revert, but kind of shift to a way of thinking that's very heavily based on heuristics. There are going to be a lot more snap judgments of people. And this is all because of, the global panic, the collapsing economy, and the increasingly globalized world in which we live. So I don't envy people who are studying abroad, and I certainly don't envy people with family from elsewhere, because being hit by a global panic like this will take all sorts of societal tensions and crank them up to 11.
Yeah, well said. Well, and that's why we have to say be safe, especially in America. And this is, encouraging news coming out of China that they will have their economy back online soon. It really is that drug or that vaccine that we're waiting for. In a way, if this all blows over, and, everything, everybody keeps cool heads, there may be pockets of problems here and there. But if this all blows over and the engine starts back up and the people and the manufacturing races back to North America and we become more supply chain stable thinkers, we think about supply chains in terms of stability for our domestic needs rather than our greed. I hope the world continues to globalize in certain ways. What I mean is, if you want to go on holiday in France or if you want a holiday in San Francisco, it's not a crime. It's not. We should be able to still do these sorts of things. But yes, where things are produced, absolutely, these things need to be reconsidered and thought about in a new way, considered in a new way. So yes, I do think this is this globalization, but a small G instead of a big G in a way.
Yes. And I think.
And what do you think? What do you think this means for? I don't want to use the word globalist entities, but entities like that, like the IMF or like the World Bank, obviously, or the United Nations, or the Asian Development Bank, or the ASEAN, or any of these institutions that claim to have authority over huge swabs of countries in terms of being a forum or a development project. What do you think these sorts of projects what's in store for these sorts of projects? And you can go down to the individual projects if you want, because I know each one will have a different meaning.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think, for better or for worse, these institutions, as far as I can tell, are not going away. Like you were saying, there's a mass upheaval of, the global stock exchange and different currencies that various countries are using to trade with one another. Like you were saying, Saudi Arabia is having a lot of currency troubles and problems trading abroad, mostly because of the decline of what we call in political science the resource trap or the resource curse, where an illiberal or even autocratic regime will be sustained because it's not necessarily accountable to its people in terms of economic output and economic production for that country in question. Saudi Arabia is a very good example of that. And I
I
think
don't even think, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just got to say, I don't even think they have an income tax or state taxes in that country. They have one game and it's called oil. I don't think they have taxes on the people.
My understanding is that they have a tax system, but it's not as efficient or as complicated or complex as anything you would see in Europe or the United States. I know that Iran actually experimented with a universal basic income based on a bread subsidy a while back. And obviously, that's not going to fly because any kind of economic output from a government to its citizenry can't be unilateral. It requires some sort of input from the people in return. Now, what George Bush did during Hurricane Katrina is a very good example of this. He kind of offloaded the costs of the tax rebates that were afforded to the people that were inconvenienced or sometimes put in physical danger onto the people, where they would have to pay them back during the next fiscal year when people were paying their taxes, right? But that also opens up a lot of problems. One of my greatest economic concerns is tax evasion, where if you have, a progressive tax system with, with different tax brackets, if a demographic that's supposed to pay more of its taxes than it does isn't appropriately punished, what you have is an inappropriately used or improperly used system that people then blame for being inefficient.
Yeah.
When in reality, that's not actually what's happening. It's not the system that's inefficient. It's the way that system is being used that's the actual problem. So I think in terms of global regulations, what I want to see is what happens with the Paris Accords. Because the Paris Accords don't currently have any form of accountability for the countries that are enrolled in them. And we're actually seeing an environmental aspect to all of this, where a lot of factories, if not all factories, have shut down in a lot of countries due to the coronavirus. China was a very good example. Its carbon dioxide production dropped seemingly overnight almost to zero because all the factories in the country were shut down. Now, of course, the dark green environmentalists, which I've talked about on this show, are going to point to this. They're going to use it as a political talking point and say, see, the virus proves that we're correct. The virus proves that, what we've been saying about the dangers of an economically developed, globalizing society are true. So we need to prepare for that. And what I want to see, and I don't know what kind of response is being mounted against this talking point, but I want to see the bright green environmentalists hit back with evidence of technology improving the world. My assumption is that either Israel or the United States, as we talked about, or even South Korea, which has been very good at managing this pandemic, they've actually had a lot of the cases in the country avoided because of their tough border restrictions and relatively small, not as dense population, in addition to their universal healthcare system. They've mitigated a lot of those concerns. And I want to see bright green environmentalists jump on this and talk about the benefits of healthcare technology, the benefits of vaccine development and testing kits. If they're able to capitalize on that, they'll be able to advance their cause. But if not, dark green environmentalists are going to gain a lot of ground. We're going to see a global collapse in free trade agreements. We're not going to see NAFTA continue. We're not going to see anything like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But again, that remains to be seen. I think this is a historical force in political science. This is an exaggeration, but it's almost like the next 9/11, where people used to use 9/11 as a talking point on the presidential debate stage and say, when I was mayor of New York, like Bloomberg was saying, when I was mayor of New York during 9/11, I did this and this and this, and it really hit people where it counts. It was a very powerful talking point. People are going to do that with the coronavirus. people are going to look back on this and say, where were we? What were we doing? How were we adapting? And that's going to be reflected in our global political and economic policy.
You raised some really good points there. And, what I found down here, and I don't know about you, but I found that as the virus spread, the messages got more muddly and the governments got more confused, and there was a lot of mixed messages, and nobody knew really where to look. Even the Prime Minister was blaming the World Health Organization, and they were blaming other people. It was blame, 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 blame. And even if you're not an avid follower of politics or whatever, you were forced into this game of cat and mouse. The normal population was, as their bread and circuses were removed, and they looked to their local leaders, or they looked to their prime ministers or their presidents or whatever, and they didn't really have many solutions. Donald Trump was just doing a State of the Union speech, and he just boom shut off aircraft in the middle of the street. Just airports went nuts. Just big statements, and then he made a mistake on trade, and then that filtered all the way down through the system, and the messages was worse than Chinese whispers. It was just total confusion. And I think that's another thing that we're going to have to work out on the other side of this, is who is in control, who does have the message, and who do people respond to. And because, right now, it felt like national governments for a while have been outsourcing their thinking to these global bodies, because the thinking is being quite simple. It's, it's a national security issue. It's ISIS or something. It's I don't know. I don't even know what they're thinking about. But it's not some sudden catastrophe like we've just seen. And, they almost didn't know how to respond. The national governments didn't really know how to function in this new environment and what it would mean. And that filtered right down to a local level, where a lot of different mixed messages, a lot of jibber-jabbering, and a lot of inconsistent policies from local officials to national. But of course, at the end of it, they all said, "Oh, we knew what we were doing all along. This was always supposed to be this messy," but it didn't. It revealed some very big inefficiencies. And we talk about all the time on this show preventative policies. We should have seen this coming. And the United States Transhumanist-Party. It's going to build you that weather radar, right? That's the analogy I'm going with. Or if there's an earthquake in the middle of the ocean, we're going to know about the earthquake and the fact that a tsunami's coming, and the siren will go, and the policies will be implemented, and the people will be allowed to run off the beach and up onto the mountain and get into the safety shelter, and everyone will be okay. The system as it was we kind of heard the earthquake, but then everybody looked around to each other saying, "Somebody lead us." We know who's supposed to lead us, but they're not saying anything properly. And so the messages all the way down were just muddled and confused, and it was a bit chaotic. It was more chaotic in a way because it affected more people than 9/11. 9/11, it was a security thing. So there was, George Bush said some stuff, and the security apparatus clicked in, and then we're at war or whatever. But this was on every level of every aspect of every society: big companies, little companies, small businesses, mom and dad, schools. The whole world, was suddenly shocked, and the messaging of that was really, really lost. What do you think? Do you think the United States Transhumanist-Party has a good idea in advocating for preventative policies like building a weather radar, building an early warning system for these sorts of catastrophes?
Yes, I actually had a chance to take a look at the emergency measures that you talked about with Chairman Gennady Stolyarov earlier on this show, and I think that's a very good start. Now, personally, one of the measures was mandatory housing of the homeless. If you look at the homeless crisis in many parts of the world, and even in many parts of America, but especially in San Francisco, it's a multivariate issue. And the homeless are actually being hit hardest not only by the coronavirus pandemic, but also by the lack of available hospitals and testing kits. Because a lot of the reason why people remain homeless is not because they can't afford a house. This is, of course, an issue, but it's a separate issue. If you were unable to live in San Francisco and afford a house, you could move to wherever you were going to come there from. You could be, with parents or friends or wherever. You could look for cheaper housing elsewhere. A major component of the homeless issue in San Francisco, at least, and it is kind of unique in this regard, is healthcare, especially mental health care, but healthcare in general. A lot of people, including a lot of politicians here, mistake it for a housing issue when in reality it's a healthcare issue. So I think we need to have those emergency measures at the ready in order to snap to attention with regards to health and with regards to borders. There are other aspects of governance, however, in which I would caution legislators to do the opposite, where it's not necessarily a good thing to radically invoke martial law when we don't necessarily need it. And it's not a good thing, to use a more pertinent example for the coronavirus, to very quickly, on a very kind of impulsive, impromptu level, to make announcements about changes to America's federal budget, right? This is something I would oppose, because you can't just, out of the blue radically change the amount of money that the average American family gets. There's a process, and there's a reason for that process. So we're seeing a mass political realignment, and I hope that other parties will be able to take cues from what's happening and prepare accordingly.
And you mentioned the UBI, helicopter money, and I hope this isn't the death of the dollar, because that would be traumatic. I think that needs to be done in a really stable, reasonable way, or that could lead to a catastrophe, global catastrophe. I hope this isn't the death of the dollar, but in a way, you mentioned helicopter money, and yes, UBI is important. We've been talking about UBI on this channel not for these reasons, but for the reasons of automation, of course. And the emergence of joblessness, and again, this virus has shone a light on the skeleton that is the emerging automation. All the jobs that we've been talking about that could be automated have just been just shone. You've just seen the city evaporate, where robots could take all of those jobs, and so now people get a glimpse into the future. Hopefully, in less than 6 months, but 6 months about, when things start roaring back, remember that you've seen the future of the AI future, the robotic future, and the reasons that we're talking about AI, and that from the right to the left, we are starting to look at UBI more and more and more as a solution to that problem. And you've seen it now. You're seeing it in the streets. If the streets are empty, that's not coronavirus. That's the technology revolution that's around the corner. And that's what we've been trying to tell you, and why UBI is not a wholly bad idea, embraced from Republicans like Zoltan Itzvan to Democrats like Andrew Yang. Both the Republicans and the Democrats agree on this issue. So, so I think people have been, this is a shot into the future, a look into the future, a glimpse, and you can see that there. Before we go, if you want to add to the UBI statement there about automation, but before we go, I wanted to also ask you about, what do you think the role of the mainstream media has had in this? Do you think they've hyped this up a little too high? The left and the right quite disagree on this quite vigorously. The left kind of saying that this is an absolute necessity to hype this up. The right saying it's not worth it. It's not worth crashing everything like this. It's been overhyped. and the right actually starting to talk about issues that we talk about here all the time about cardiac arrest, and they're starting to pull out the stat book. They're starting, actually, what is the biggest cause of death? They actually looked it up. Daniel. But so what do you want to say about the role of the media? But if you wanted to add to the UBI debate, you for robotics, you can as well.
Yes, well, I'll go in order. First, I'll address UBI, and then I'll address the media. With regards to UBI, it's about time that it becomes a bipartisan issue, and you're absolutely right on this. Mitt Romney and Tulsi Gabbard agreed on a political issue. This is a watershed moment. This is huge. I never thought that I would see this, within the next 10 to 15 years, much less now. I mean, I'm sure some people thought that they wouldn't see anything like this in their lifetimes. But desperate times, I guess, call for desperate measures. And we're seeing a lot of more ideological political stances give way to pragmatism in times of crisis. With regards to basic income specifically, my saying is this. The debate is not whether or not we should have a basic income. The debate is over what kind of basic income we should have. Because there's a huge difference between the basic income in AOC's Green New Deal and the Alaska Permanent Fund, for example. And those two are very different from, for example, what Gary Johnson wants to do and what Friedrich Hayek, the great libertarian thinker, supported in theory. Of course, he never outlined how this would be implemented in practice, but the fact that he discussed it as an option is historically and politically significant. Now, when it comes to the media, I don't think that overhyping the crisis is the problem as much as inaccurate reporting on the crisis. The masks that people wear that I mentioned earlier in this broadcast are a good example, where people believe for some reason that they need to stock up on masks, stock up on paper towels and on toilet paper, right? And in fact, there's been I surprised myself just by saying this, but there has been an increase in gun purchases as a result of the coronavirus. What are people going to do? Shoot the virus to death? I'm sorry, but that's not going to help. And I think that feeds into a component of the prepper mentality that exists both on the libertarian left, such as the Green Party, with Chad Wilson, who I believe you've had on the show, yes, and the libertarian right as well. I mean, a lot of people really feel like this is a miniature apocalypse. And what the media needs to do, in my view, and this is certainly an arena in which they can improve, is to focus on two things: building calm and building trust. Now, the average media apparatus gets clicks on shocking and controversial headlines. I get that. But if there were more consistent funding that didn't have to do with advertising, then there wouldn't be as much of a need for clickbait. You wouldn't need to shock people and mislead people with false information. You could build calm and trust. And that's what the media needs to do. And that's really what they're not doing. They're dropping the ball.
Yeah, I have to agree with you here. I think they found a story that they can pick up, and now they're playing with it, and they're causing global havoc, and they're making a lot of money out of it as they go along, and it's destructive. They have a responsibility. They have a huge responsibility, and I think they're running away a little bit too much. And I do agree with you. You do have PBS there in the United States, which is a fairly well-run organization. It probably could use a little more government funding and a little less of these both foundations, companies, and probably viewer audience contributions. I think a viewer contributions, audience contributions is probably okay, but a little less foundation and corporate sponsorship would be good. But the problem there is that the government, Mitt Romney. I remember Mitt Romney saying, "I love Sesame Street" or something like that during the debate with Obama. And he said, "But he's got to go. We can't afford this. We can't afford Sesame Street or whatever it was. Pick your favorite PBS character. Whatever. But there's that mentality that, oh, definitely on the right, it's all got to cut, but they only cut things that doesn't really impact them, or that increases their power, or gives their buddies more power. And on the other side, it's all about enlargement of those institutions, but it's enlargement for the government. There's no other. That's why people don't like them either, because it's like it'll give the government more power, more of a media monopoly position, and they leave other people out in the cold. And that's why the right hammers back like that. And it's got to be some sort of mix there. And I think foundations and corporate can go, but viewer and public-private can stay. And there needs to be some sort of funding found in the middle that makes for fair and accurate reporting. Judy Woodruff or whatever, I'm sure she's a lovely lady. I'm sure she does a very good job. In Australia here, we've got ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. It's an arm of the government. It's funded by the government. They do run ads, but the ads are not, they're sort of just YouTube ads. They just sort of generate a tiny little revenue stream. They don't have corporate sponsors or anything like that. And you're right. The incentive for clickbait is dramatically less. It's dramatically less. We have, I read the American news, and it's World War III. It's Armageddon. It's Armageddon. And in Australia, it's, no, not really. Here's some analysis of what's going on. You know what I mean?
World War II.5.
Yeah,
it's not that.
The American news is always hyped up to that nth degree, and actually it is destructive, and the only good thing about it though is it's Rupert Murdoch, who is Australian, so ha 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 ha. I'm just kidding. All right, well, we got to go, but look, this has been a great debate, and you stay safe in lockdown and get some exercise, get some fresh air. I hopefully. This virus goes away soon, and life will slowly repair itself and go back to normal. And keep writing your wonderful. I'm about halfway through the transcript you sent me. It's fantastic. We've got to build these machines at some point. I'm really looking forward to doing that. Going along that journey, I think these carbon capture initiatives are really, really important. And stay on the environment, because right now is the big time when a lot of deals are being made behind government doors. So you stay on the environment for us while everyone else is looking the other way, and see what's going where, because all those packages and deals that wanted to be released are now just flooding. They're just flooding out of the government in the form of billions and billions of dollars of fiscal stimulus. So we should expect many new exciting developments on the other side of this, but it's a whole new world. It's a whole new world on the other side of this, and I don't know what's in store. You don't know what's in store, but hopefully it's better. Hopefully it's better.
Hopefully. And I just hope the hysteria dies down and that people aren't targeted on the basis of whether or not they look, like they're from Wuhan, China, because that's a major concern for a lot of people out here. And, the last thing we need is, during a global panic, is another global panic on top of that. So
we don't want the civil disorder to start, because that's just just an accelerant. We want China to start its factories back up. We want the goods in the dock, and we know now that we need to repair the supply chains. So thank you very much. We get the lesson. Whoever's doing this to us, we get it. We know it. All right. Thank you very much, Daniel Yeluashvili, for coming on. Thank you for coming on Detonation. I want to thank a whole bunch of people, including Gennady Stolarov, Mr. Shoemaker, Mike DeVerde, Future Humanity Project, and a whole bunch of others who are starting to pile on $5 donations to keep this show alive. And I thank you very much, everybody. I've got to get the list. I keep saying I've got to get the list. It's growing. Just used to having 3 people, but now it's actually starting to take off. People are enjoying it. Thank you for subscribing, and keep subscribing and sharing these videos out. Get some free Thrivous. And of course, to the star of the show, thanks Mr. Yeluashvili for coming back on and walking us through what life is like in lockdown in San Francisco.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
No problem.